Sonic the Hedgehog 3 released in 1994 on the Sega Genesis. Sonic & Knuckles also released on the Genesis later that same year, sporting an unconventional cartridge that allowed it to connect to Sonic 3. Combine the two and you got Sonic 3 & Knuckles, one of the most beloved Sonic games ever made. As you may already know, Sonic 3 & Knuckles was originally meant to release as a single game, but due to time constraints and limited cartridge space, Sonic Team ended up having to split the game in two. However, thanks to Sonic & Knuckles' unique cartridge that utilized what Sega called lock-on technology, players who bought both could experience the game as originally intended. Sonic 3 & Knuckles is one of, if not the best Sonic game ever made. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's undisputed, but I think at least 90% of the fanbase can agree on this, and anything above 50% is a miracle. That's how you know that a game is truly special. As such, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I have a lot of positive things to say about this game. But with that said, this review ain't gonna be all sunshine and rainbows. Here's the thing. Everyone, and I mean everyone, has talked to death about how amazing this game is. And don't get me wrong, they are right to do so. Sonic 3 & Knuckles is a great platformer, and in my opinion, the high point of the Sonic series as a whole. But doesn't that mean Sonic the Hedgehog peaked nearly 30 years ago? That's a lot of time for the dust to settle on this thing, and for its flaws to come up from beneath the surface. And since I'm a cynical nitpicking killjoy who loves nothing more than finding everything wrong with my favorite video games, I want to talk about that. As such, this video is probably going to come across more negative than your typical Sonic 3K is a masterpiece essay. I say this now because I want to make it clear that it's all out of love for both this game and the series in general. I don't tear these games apart because I hate them. Quite frankly, that just doesn't sound fun. I tear them apart because I want to understand how the series can improve going forward. And what better way to do that than to take one of the greatest Sonic games ever made and see what it does wrong. To be clear, this video will still aim to be a holistic assessment of the game overall, so don't expect it to be all negative. In fact, I'm probably overstating how much criticism there's actually going to be in this review. After all, I did just admit that I see this game as the overall peak of the series, so clearly I must have plenty of positive things to say. And trust me, I definitely do. With that in mind then, let's get this blue ball rolling. For this video, I played Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles separately on their original Genesis versions and the combined version on Sonic Origins. In the former, I avoided the special stages for the most part to focus on the any % experience, while in Origins I made sure to collect both the Chaos Emeralds and the Super Emeralds. I also made sure to avoid improper usage of semicolons in this script. Now I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments telling me that I should have played the fan-made mod, Sonic 3 Air, instead, so let's get things straight real quick. I've played Air before, and it's great. If you're looking for new additions, quality of life features, and an overall more customized experience, it's pretty much impossible for me not to recommend. I'm also sure the same can be said for Sonic 1 Forever, Sonic CD Miracle Edition, etc. However, 1, these aren't official releases, and 2, they make a lot of changes and improvements to the games themselves. Thus, I don't think it would be fair to base my points around these fan-made versions. Maybe I'll cover these in their own separate videos someday, but for my core Sonic retrospectives, I want to focus on the official releases. Alright? Okay, with all that out of the way and without further ado, this is my review of Sonic 3 & Knuckles. After the events of Sonic 2, the Death Egg has crashed on Angel Island, a floating landmass suspended by the Chaos Emeralds and Master Emerald. Not one to pass down this kind of opportunity, Dr. Eggbotnik plans to steal said emerald so he can repair the Death Egg. He tricks Knuckles, the island's sole inhabitant and guardian of the emeralds, that Sonic and Tails are the ones after them, which is actually kind of true if you think about it. And so the two team up. Sonic and Tails have to set out and stop Dr. Robo-Eggnik once again. In past videos, I've briefly touched on the classic Sonic game's ability to tell stories without any dialogue, relying entirely on visual communication. Sonic 3 & Knuckles not only continues this trend, but also refines and expands on it, as a sequel should do. There's almost always some sort of cutscene before every zone, boss, etc., and it gives the game so much more life. These also accomplish a lot in motivating gameplay. They show Eggman's robots actively destroying the environment, as well as Knuckles doing mischievous things to establish him as a threat, but my favorite thing about them is that they actually show how the heck Sonic and Tails travel between these wildly different environments, often in extremely creative ways. Sonic 3 & Knuckles excels as spectacle, particularly in the way it uses set pieces. One of the best examples of this is the snowboarding section in Ice Cap Zone, which accomplishes several things at once. 1, it shows how Sonic ended up in this environment. 2, it requires no input and lets the player acclimate to said environment. And 3, It's really freaking cool.
Pun entirely intended.
Shut up. Then again, Sonic 3K just excels at presentation in general. I believe that this was the game where Sonic Team finally found a happy medium between the abstract, psychedelic visuals of Sonic 1 and CD and the more grounded, detail-oriented style of Sonic 2. I was never a huge fan of how busy certain sprites appeared in the latter, but those who did like that style will likely enjoy Sonic 3K's visuals even more. It still uses noise and dithering for faux detail, but it's done more tastefully this time. What really ties the aesthetic together though is the environment design. No game up to this point has ever missed in that department, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles takes the creativity to all new heights. Literally. From the flooded ruins of Hitarakiri to the heavenly temples of Sky Sanctuary, every zone feels entirely distinct from the other. Even areas that use standard video gamey archetypes like Ice Cap and Lava Reef manage to stand out from the crowd through their use of color. And despite having double the content of any of its predecessors, Sonic 3K somehow managed to make individual acts unique too, a first for the series. Angel Island is set ablaze by Act 2, Knuckles shuts the lights off midway through Carnival Night, and Lava Reef shifts from a typical volcano environment to one with an absolutely gorgeous blue color scheme. I think CD still ranks highest for me, but Sonic 3 and Knuckles' visual style is nonetheless cohesive, pleasing to the eyes, and features some of the finest sprite work I've ever seen. Speaking of, Sonic's player sprites have seen another update, and considering it's a much more drastic change than in Sonic 2, I'd be remiss not to mention it. Hot take incoming! I think these are the best Sonic sprites out of all the original Genesis games. Yeah, even though Sonic 3K's sprite set does all the same things that I hated in Sonic 2, the brighter blue, the highlights, etc., I think it's actually to the benefit of this new artwork. I think the reason those bothered me in Sonic 2 was that they were tacked onto the already familiar sprites of Sonic 1. On the other hand, Sonic 3K's sprites are entirely new, and therefore designed around this style, so I think it fits a lot more here. On top of that, Sonic just straight up looks better in my opinion. He's more on model, and a lot of his animations are much more fluid and expressive. Don't get me wrong, the sprites from Sonic 1 are iconic and are probably still my favorites overall, but if I had to put on my nerdy glasses and pretend that I knew anything about objective art design, I'd say Sonic 3K's are better drawn and fit the art style a lot better. With the visuals covered, it's only natural that we talk about the music. Unlike the graphics, the music in Sonic 3 is pretty different from Sonic and Knuckles, and that's because some of the songs in the former were composed by Michael Jackson, maybe. Hardcore fans already know this, but for decades now there's been a long-running rumor that Michael Jackson, yes, that Michael Jackson, was involved with Sonic 3's soundtrack, but for one reason or another wasn't credited. There's plenty of evidence on both sides, but I'm not gonna get into that debate here. Not only am I far from an expert on this matter, but I also don't find it relevant to discuss in a retrospective review. There are a lot of composers credited in Sonic 3, notably including Brad Buxer, who was apparently a member of Michael Jackson's sound team. For the sake of brevity, I'll be attributing the alleged MJ songs to him. Am I fully confident that this is giving credit where it's rightfully due? Absolutely not. But for the sake of talking about the actual music, I figure I should just stick to what the credits and random people in Deoxys Prime's comment section tell me. If I'm wrong, and I'm sure both the YouTube algorithm and myself would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Anyway, the soundtrack in both halves of the Sonic 3K experience is overall excellent. Despite being limited by the vanilla Genesis sound chip, some of these compositions easily rival Sonic CD's soundtrack in my opinion. Tracks like Angel Island, Hydrocodile, Flying Battery, and Sky Sanctuary remain some of the series' most iconic tracks, and it's not hard to see, or rather hear, why. The Brad Buxer compositions are easily the most standout tracks, though I wouldn't say that's necessarily a good thing. A lot of them feel so removed from the style of the rest of the music that they tend to stick out like a sore thumb, relying heavily on beats and samples rather than distinct melodies. Not that I can't enjoy some sick beats, but every time the game transitions to that stupid boss theme, I can't help but laugh. When Sonic 3 and Knuckles was remade for Sonic Origins, the Brad Buxer songs were removed due to copyright issues or something. Again, not gonna get into that here. Bottom line is, Sonic Origins replaced these tracks with prototype songs that were going to be in the original game instead of the songs we originally ended up with. These honestly fit a lot more in my opinion. A lot of people seem to despise the Origins soundtrack, but I think that's only because it's not what they're used to. If I'm gonna be honest, I think a lot of these are just straight up better than what we got in the original retail Sonic 3. I don't think I can trust the judgment of anyone who prefers this over this. I actually think the outcome we got with Sonic Origins was the best we could have reasonably hoped for. Sonic 3 and Knuckles finally got the Christian Whitehead treatment, Sega is free from the shackles of music copyright, and the Origins soundtrack is just as good, if not better than the original. With all this said, there is one Brad Buxer track I will always miss, and I think you can all guess which one. At the end of the day though, both the original Genesis version and Sonic Origins provide an excellent audio experience that's a treat for the ears. Aside from the audio channels being funky, I'm not sure what's going on there. With the presentation covered, it's finally time to get into the gameplay. As always, we'll start with the fundamental mechanics, both what's changed from previous games and what's new to this one. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is the first game in the series to include a save system, allowing you to continue from the last zone you were in should you get a game over. Strangely, Sonic and Knuckles by itself doesn't have this feature, though if you combine the cartridges, you'll be able to save anywhere across the two games. Another benefit of the combined Sonic 3 and Knuckles experience is that you unlock full access to both of the game's playable characters. Sonic, Tails, and of course, Knuckles. Let's start with Sonic. The blue blur retains pretty much everything from previous games, though the super peel out has been removed. Oh, however shall I recover from this heinous tragedy? Well, thankfully, a new move, the Insta Shield, is here to fill this gaping hole in my heart, and this is one of my favorite moves that Sonic has ever had. Pressing jump and then pressing it again will now extend Sonic's attack box for a split second, and this is incredibly helpful for taking care of spiky enemies while being precise enough that it doesn't remove the challenge. Sonic 3 and Knuckles also adds 3 variants of the established shield power-up, the Flame Shield, Water Shield, and Lightning Shield. These are awesome. All of them protect Sonic from their respective elements. He can't drown with the Water Shield, and he can walk on lava unscathed with the Flame Shield. More interesting, however, is the additional abilities that these provide. The Flame Shield gives you an air dash, the Lightning Shield magnetizes rings and lets you double jump, and the Water Shield lets you bounce for extra height, acting as sort of a precursor to the Bounce Bracelet. Now, due to the classic game's one-button control scheme, having these shields equipped as Sonic removes his ability to perform the Insta Shield. I'm aware that a lot of people don't like when power-ups do this, and even my own game, Wishlist on Steam, link in description, has gotten some complaints for doing the same thing. However, I disagree with the idea that this is an objectively bad game design choice. In my opinion, having trade-offs like this can help a game feel more varied, and I'd argue that's the case with Sonic 3K too. Heck, that's the whole idea behind the shields. Each has their own pros and cons, and since they're easy to obtain both in the main zones and the bonus stages, they afford the player choices of how they want to traverse the levels, and I think that's valuable. Moving on, Tails acts as an easier counterpart to Sonic given that he can fly. Yes, he can actually fly in this game. I checked. He can fly. Tails can fly in this game. Please put the gun down. Honestly, there's not a whole lot for me to say about Tails otherwise. Since he can fly, he can access certain areas of the stages that Sonic can't by himself, so I suppose it's a decent way to get some extra replayability, but I don't know. Playing this way just isn't for me. Unfortunately, I can largely say the same thing about Knuckles. Now, unlike Tails, Knuckles does have his own unique campaign that shows both games' events from his point of view, and alters certain portions of the level design to fit his playstyle. But honestly, I've never loved his playstyle all that much. I'm definitely going to get a lot of hate for saying that, so let me make something clear. I don't think Knuckles is a bad playable character. His moveset will click with some people, while it won't with others. Please indulge me for a moment and let me explain why it doesn't click for me personally. Knuckles' main moves are gliding and climbing walls, so like Tails, his playstyle is focused more on vertical movement than Sonic's. This isn't bad in concept. I do like verticality in my Sonic games after all. However, it's the execution of these moves that bothers me. The climbing is dreadfully slow and can only be performed by gliding into a wall. That wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that the glide has its own problems. First of all, if you let go of it, or if it runs out, it completely kills all of your momentum and drops Knuckles like a rock. This alone is enough to ruin your flow, but on top of that, you can't even glide in the first place unless you're specifically jumping. You can't just be in the air, you have to press the jump button from the ground before you can glide. This means that you can't glide after falling off a cliff, and you can't glide from a ramp, despite that basically being a jump for all intents and purposes. Combine all of this and you get a moveset that just feels wrong, at least to me. Again, I'm aware that Knuckles has clicked with a lot of people, and I don't think the concept is bad, but I just wish his moveset wasn't so restrictive. restrictive. Imagine, for instance, being able to climb quickly up a wall, fall into a glide, let go while maintaining your momentum, then carry that momentum into a ramp and glide from there. I feel like if stunts like that were possible, I'd be more inclined to play as Knuckles. As it stands though, I just prefer playing as Sonic in this game. Moving on from playable characters, Sonic 3K also once again makes changes to how you access the special stages. Before we get into that though, we need to talk about level design. Despite Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles being two halves of the same game, each feel distinct from one another when it comes to its level design. Because of this, I've decided to tackle each of their level design philosophies one at a time, so let's start with Sonic 3. While Sonic 1's level design was pretty varied in terms of pace, Sonic 2 and Sonic CD were laser focused on opposite sides of the same coin. The former consisted of high-speed levels that constantly moved the player forward, only occasionally slowing down to break up the pace with challenging platforming. Meanwhile, Sonic CD focused entirely on exploration, still utilizing Sonic's physics in creative ways, just not for the sake of getting to the end. Sonic 3 combines the philosophies of these two games. You could make the argument that this makes it closer to Sonic 1 than anything, but play the two back to back and you'll quickly realize just how different the games are in their execution. On a base level, Sonic 3 leans more towards Sonic 2's level design approach, but it makes platforming the backbone instead of speed. This is to better serve the exploration and how it relates to the special stages. Again, we'll get to that. However, speed is still an important component, not only for maneuvering the levels yourself, but also in the way the game handles automation. Now, automation has become kind of a dirty word in this fanbase, and it's not all that hard to see why. For the past decade or so, Sonic games, especially the 3D ones, have entirely lacked the pinball physics that made the series so iconic in the first place. Because of this, they've resorted to taking control away from the player and placing Sonic on an invisible spline that moves him wherever the level needs him to. Effectively, the game plays itself. Classic Sonic's automation, on the other hand, is completely different. Unless you're in one of those brief parts of the level that utilize some kind of perspective effect, games like Sonic 2 and 3 never take your control away, nor do they disable Sonic's physics. Automated sections in these games rely entirely on level design to get Sonic where he needs to, whether it's the design of the terrain or the placement of springs and dash pads. In my opinion, this implementation of automated sections is justified because it's not just spectacle. The developers didn't draw a line that Sonic magically magnetizes to, they made levels that take advantage of the way his physics work. As a result, the automated sections in Sonic 2 and especially Sonic 3 are satisfying in a way that the modern games just aren't. It's like watching a Rube Goldberg machine or one of those Mario Maker levels that play themselves. You know how the individual mechanics work in a vacuum, and now you're seeing them work together to accomplish something. The classic Sonic games, especially Sonic 3, use this gratification as a reward for completing challenging platforming sections, and it's an excellent use for Sonic's speed that I too often see dismissed as lazy. This is lazy. This is art. Okay, now that I've got that out of my system, let's talk about the levels themselves. Sonic 3's level design overall is very well done, both by Sonic standards and by platformer standards in general. However, they're not perfect. For one thing, they tend to rely on gimmicks a lot more than any of the previous games. This isn't entirely bad, however. Every zone has its own distinct ideas that are fleshed out over the course of the two acts. The Yoshi's Island approach, if you will. However, some levels lean so heavily into their gimmicks that they become downright annoying. Marble Garden is especially bad for this. With that said though, most of the zones aren't like this. Angel Island's gimmicks are fun, Hide Your Kitty's gimmicks are there to both serve the platforming and automation, and I especially love the creative ways that Ice Cap utilizes the spin dash. However, keep this gimmick thing in mind for when we talk about Sonic and Knuckles. While there are small things I could pick apart all day, Sonic 3's level design is overall excellent and the best the series had ever seen up to that point. It features challenging platforming and fun exploration while still implementing speed in a way that's both rewarding and gratifying. But what about Sonic and Knuckles? Well, at a surface level, it does use all of the same mechanics and philosophies as Sonic 3, and yet, despite this, Sonic and Knuckles just feels different to play. I'll do my best to try to pinpoint exactly why. You remember those automation sections I spoke of before? Well, they're much less prominent by this half of the adventure. Instead, most of and K's levels focus on exploration, platforming, and of course, gimmicks. And if there's one thing I can say this game does definitively worse than its counterpart, It's the gimmicks. While Sonic 3's level-specific features were fun for the most part, a lot of Sonic and Knuckles' gimmicks are so pace-breaking that they often end up hurting any flow remaining from the lack of automated break sections. Whether it's the pulleys in Mushroom Hill or those awful push switches in Sandopolis, they tend to make the levels come to a screeching halt, and usually not to do anything fun. Like Sonic 3 though, Sonic and Knuckles does have its exceptions, most notable of which being Lava Reef Zone in my opinion. It's not terribly speed focused, but it's nonetheless well designed as a level overall. It still has its fair share of gimmicks, but they're more in line with Sonic 3 and don't hurt the pacing of the zone. It's challenging, being a late game level and all, but it's not cheap or unfair. In my opinion, it's one of the biggest highlights in Sonic and Knuckles. With both halves of this adventure covered, what do I think of the level design overall? Well, there are great levels throughout both games, but it feels to me that Sonic Team's ambition got the better of them by the time they started to dig into Sonic and Knuckles' levels. With such a sheer quantity compared to the previous games, quality became a problem, and instead of the consistent level design from 3 carrying over, Sonic and Knuckles ended up leaning hard into gimmicks instead. But here's the thing. Even the worst levels in both of these games are still better than Metropolis Zone in Sonic 2, Metallic Madness in Sonic CD, and especially Labyrinth Zone in Sonic 1. The reality is, no matter how many holes I poke into it, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is entirely in its own league compared to its predecessors, especially when it comes to level design. And there's no better way to explain that than with the special stages. Special stages in the classic Sonic games are all over the place. Sonic 1 made you beat the level with 50 rings, which was a great incentive to hold on to your rings. However, the stages themselves were very hit or miss, and there wasn't any real reason to bother with them in the first place unless you wanted a slightly better ending. Sonic 2 made you scour the level for checkpoints to access the stages. This was annoying because that game's levels were designed around blasting through as quickly as possible, so exploring them didn't feel natural. To add insult to injury, the stages themselves were miserable. However, Sonic 2 at least had a worthwhile reward for beating these stages in the form of Super Sonic. Sonic CD both progressed and regressed in that regard. The way the stages were accessed was reverted to how it was in Sonic 1, and the levels themselves were both creative and actually fun, unlike Sonic 2. But also like Sonic 1, Sonic CD didn't have a good reward for beating the special stages. Well, it did change your ending, but you could do the same thing with the much more integral and satisfying time travel mechanic. So what about Sonic 3 and Knuckles? Well, it's practically perfect. The portals, as usual being represented by giant rings, are hidden throughout the levels, so accessing them is similar to Sonic 2 at a surface level. However, the execution of this mechanic is much better this time. As mentioned before, Sonic 3K's levels are designed with exploration in mind, unlike Sonic 2's, which are meant to be blasted through as quickly as possible. In addition to this, you no longer have to collect 50 rings, so the challenge has shifted from hanging onto your rings to simply finding the special stages in the first place. As for the stages themselves, these are easily the best out of all the original Genesis games by a wide margin. Sonic 3K's special stages place you onto a pseudo 3D grid where you have to collect all of the blue spheres while avoiding the red ones. Simple, right? Well, that's where the level design comes in. Because the mechanics are straightforward, the developers were able to focus on squeezing as much as they could out of them, and boy did they. There are so many creative layouts, and I can't think of a single one that stood out to me as cheap, unfair, etc. This is the first and possibly only Sonic game to nail every single special stage in my opinion. And of course, beating these stages and collecting all of the Chaos Emeralds will unlock Super Sonic. Now, while Super Sonic is mechanically identical to his Sonic 2 counterpart, he feels entirely different to play in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And once again, I think we have the level design to thank for that. By what was either a stroke of game design genius or a massive fluke, nearly all of the levels in both halves of the adventure feel like they're designed around Super Sonic. Even Marble Garden is enjoyable when playing as him. However, we're not quite done here. In the combined version, collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds by the end of Sonic 3 will unlock a new quest in the Sonic and Knuckles half of the adventure, a quest to collect the Super Emeralds. Now when you beat a special stage, one of the Chaos Emeralds will be turned into a Super Emerald. Interestingly enough, this part of the game actually has this little hub area where you can choose which special stage to tackle next, which is pretty cool. Alright, looks like I got all the ones on this side, so let's see what... When you finally collect all of the Super Emeralds, you'll be able to transform into Hyper Sonic, which is basically Super Sonic on steroids. He's even faster, he can jump even higher, and he even has an air dash similar to the Flame Shield. If you thought this game was fun with Super Sonic, it's even better with Hyper Sonic. And thanks to the save feature, it's possible to revisit completed levels with the form to see how it transforms the way you play them. Finally, let's talk about the bosses. Sonic 1 and 2's bosses made use of a simple design philosophy. There's no limit to how many times you can hit the boss while it's vulnerable, only the amount of time that it is. The reason this works so well is that the player's skill is what dictates the pace of the fight rather than scripted attack cycles. Sonic CD deviated from this approach, and usually to its own detriment. Instead of featuring engaging battles that test the player's skill, it tended to rely on scripted sequences and gimmicks. So what about Sonic 3 and Knuckles? Well, they're kind of hit or miss. The thing about the bosses in this game is that there are a lot of them. Previous games only had one boss per zone, but Sonic 3K has one for every single act. And like the zones themselves, the sheer quantity of bosses unfortunately seems to have affected the quality. Some of them, like this boss in Angel Island, make excellent use of the classic boss design philosophy, while others, like this boss in Flying Battery, rely on tedious gimmicks not unlike Sonic CD. I think the most egregious example is this boss in Death Egg Zone, which requires you to switch gravity to make the spiked enemies hit your opponent. It's not an entirely bad concept, but in execution this boss is so mind-numbingly boring. You just go up and down the elevator until you win. With that covered then, what about the final bosses? Spoiler alert, skip here if you don't want to see them. There's actually 3 different final bosses we have to talk about, so let's start with Sonic 3's Big Arm. This one is kind of lame. It follows the traditional platformer design approach of having long attack cycles followed by brief windows where you can hit the boss. And like the Death Egg Zone boss from earlier, it's not particularly challenging either, so the end result is a final boss that just kind of feels lackluster. Thankfully though, we have 2 more chances. Next up is the Death Egg robot in Sonic and Knuckles. Now this is a final boss in a Sonic game. The first phase is a little patience testing at first, but with practice you'll eventually figure out the best way to get in the maximum hits while the robot's fingers are vulnerable, and once you do, it just kind of clicks. However, the second phase is even better, having the robot chase you down while firing massive lasers, in between which you must hit the boss as much as you can. It's tense, it's challenging, and most importantly, the player's skill dictates the pace of the fight. It's awesome. But you know what's even more awesome? If you get to the end of Sonic and Knuckles with all of the Chaos or Super Emeralds, you'll enter Doomsday Zone, the true final boss of the game. This right here is the first ever instance of the tradition of making the final boss focused on spectacle rather than sheer challenge, and Doomsday Zone nails it first try. Getting to soar through space as Super Sonic while this absolutely badass music track plays is one of the greatest moments in the entire series. After defeating Dr. Robotnik once and for now, Sonic and Tails return the emeralds to Angel Island, they become besties with Knuckles, and the credits roll. Sonic 3 and Knuckles isn't just one of the greatest Sonic games ever made. It's an amazing platformer in general, with fantastic presentation, refined mechanics, and excellent game design all around. With that said though, it's definitely not perfect. While there are a lot of amazing levels and bosses, the sheer amount of them inevitably meant that a few stinkers would slip through the cracks, whether it's levels like Mushroom Hill, or bosses like that one in Death Egg Zone. This game definitely suffers from quantity over quality at times, and I don't think I'm out of line for saying that, however the comments may take it. But then again, what game is perfect? I may have been a little harsh at times in this review, but that's only because this game is the king. My goal with this video isn't to downplay Sonic 3 and Knuckles as a game, but rather to show just how far the series can still go, even beyond its arguable peak. Even with all of its faults, Sonic 3 and Knuckles surpassed all of its predecessors, and to this day it is rightfully regarded as one of, if not the, greatest Sonic game of all time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my other Sonic content and subscribe for more video game content just like this. You can also become a member for just $1 per month to get your name in the credits, exclusive emojis, and a special channel in my Discord server. But either way, stay tuned, thanks for watching, and as always, enjoy life.